Sunset over the Wild West spilled over the horizon with a thick, rich, fiery light. The sky, like a flaming canvas, was ablaze with purple and orange hues that gradually faded, giving way to the first cold gloom. A cool and piercing wind quietly glided across the deserted expanse, whispering among the grass and reeds the ancient secrets of the land, long forgotten by many. Beneath this fiery sky, the desert plains stretched out, seemingly lifeless, but filled with hidden danger lurking in every shadow. The shadows of wild animals flickered in the last rays of light, like ghosts that appear at nightfall. There was an uneasiness in the air, a subtle sense that today, as yesterday, one might encounter a bandit, a predator, and a hunger ready to devour the weak. The trees at the edge of the forest whispered their creaks, as if warning those who had wandered too deep into their domain. The leaves fell slowly to the ground, and their rustling sounded like a quiet whisper of warning. In this world full of cruelty and ruthlessness, even nature seemed dual, beautiful and hostile at the same time. The landscape seemed to hold its breath before nightfall, and the light of the sunset slowly faded, leaving only cold and darkness behind. Here, amidst this wild, unfriendly land, fates were intertwined in dramatic knots. The fates of people who fought for life, even when it seemed that the world had long since forgotten mercy. Dust settled on her clothes as Evelyn walked along the battered path recently abandoned by the humans. Her simple, once elegant clothes now looked lost in this ruthless world, wrinkled, stained with earth and leaves. A light wind kicked up dust around her feet, as if reminding her of how long she had wandered without purpose or support. Each step she took was a struggle, her legs trembling and her strength slowly draining from her body as if sucking out the last drops of life. Her face was all that remained of the young woman they had once known. Weariness, fear, and despair mingled in its features, reflected in eyes reddened by wind and tears. Evelyn looked fragile, almost transparent against the broad, harsh nature. And yet she held on, clinging to life against all odds. Her hands could barely keep her balance, her fingers trembled, and her breathing was ragged, as if each breath was a struggle. She could hardly cope with the sensation that her strength was slipping away like sand through her fingers. It was not only physical exhaustion that burned in her chest, but also the weight of betrayal. The man she had trusted had left her here in this wilderness without a shred of hope. She tried to walk on, though her legs were increasingly shaky, as if nature itself was resisting her efforts to survive. Every movement was agonizing. Her body demanded rest, which was not even in sight. But there was a faint flame in the back of her mind, a survival instinct that wouldn't let her give up and sink into the abyss of despair. The forest around her was slowly sinking into darkness, and the sounds of the wilderness grew louder and louder, the cracking of twigs, the rustling of leaves, the distant cries of birds and animals whose lives seemed much harsher and simpler than human life. She realized that her world was getting narrower and there was no way back. Her thoughts were confused, fear encompassed more and more, but she kept going, slowly, shakily, but surely. In this silence, filled only with the sounds of the forest, Evelyn felt both part of the wild, untamed nature and a stranger in this world. Her mind wandered between memories and the present, between hope and despair. And when her legs finally gave out, her body unable to support her weight, she collapsed at the foot of the rocks, lying on the cold ground. Her eyes closed, giving way to the darkness she was sinking deeper into with each passing moment. Scraps of events came back to her mind, like ghosts that wouldn't let her rest. The man she had once trusted had become not a defense, but a betrayal whose pain was sharper than any wound. His departure was a cold knife stabbed into her very heart, leaving a wound that could not be healed by time or prayers. She remembered how he had looked at her one last time, merciless and indifferent, how he had left her alone in this wilderness, without food, water, or hope. In those moments she realized how fragile and lonely she was in this ruthless world, where words of promise turned to nothing and a human soul could be betrayed at the most unexpected moment. The resentment clutched at his chest like a ring of steel, preventing him from breathing and thinking clearly. The bitterness of betrayal seeped into every corner of her mind, making her blood run cold. She knew that no one could be trusted, that the world was too cruel and unfair. But in the depths of her soul there was hope, even the faintest hope, like a barely perceptible ray of light in a dark forest. The soul was shattering into 1,000 shards, but she did not let them fall completely. Every breath was a struggle, every movement a protest to a fate that seemed ruthless and harsh. She clung to life like a thin thread that could break at any moment, but still held her to the surface. Her thoughts weaved between fear and determination, pain and the will to survive. She realized she was alone, and this loneliness was her new reality, empty, cold, but the only one she could accept. It was in this darkness of betrayal and despair that an inner strength was born that could lead to salvation, even through the unknown and pain. Each memory of betrayal added heaviness to her steps, but did not break her. Deep in her heart, beneath a layer of resentment and bitterness, a flame of self-belief warmed, a last shield against hopelessness, an anchor in the storm that threatened to carry her into the abyss. As long as that flame burned, she could not give up. She had to go forward through fear, pain, and betrayal, to an unknown but vivid future. The forest around him was a living, breathing organism. Every tree, every dry leaf rustling beneath her feet, every wild sound was like a pulsing thread stretching through space. She walked, treading uncertainly on the soft bed of moss and fallen branches, trying to untangle the path in the chaos of greens and shadows. The wind played with the branches, making the leaves whisper stories only the forest could hear. The voices in her head intertwined with the real sounds of nature. Sometimes she thought she heard someone calling her name, but it was only an echo of fear reflected in the cries of birds. There was a rustle here and there, as if something large was creeping nearby, making her heart beat faster. But these sounds were part of the forest, and in time they became familiar. The day gradually waned, and the light grew softer, fading into purple twilight. The shadows of the trees lengthened, and the forest sank into semi-darkness. Time was losing its shape, becoming an endless stream of moments in which past and present were intertwined. Everything slowed down, as if nature was holding its breath. She walked forward, each movement harder and harder. The heaviness in her chest prevented her from breathing freely, her feet sinking into the ground. Evelyn felt that the world around her was becoming alien and hostile, and it was as if the forest was watching her, assessing her weakness. But step by step she continued on her way, not for reassurance but for survival instinct. Time and space blurred. Hours and minutes disappeared in a world of shadows and rustles, giving way to a sense of constant motion, taking her farther and farther away from her former life, from memories that had lost their power. She listened only to her own breathing and the beating of her heart, which merged with the rhythms of the night forest. The sky overhead grew darker. In the distance, the first stars twinkled behind the trees, cold and distant, like someone else's eyes, unable to help. The cold penetrated his bones, his thoughts muddled. But even in this darkness, in this oblivion, Evelyn still lived, albeit on the edge. Every step was a struggle with nature and herself. But she walked, because to give up was to disappear, to become part of the forest, to be lost forever. The forest gradually narrowed, giving way to the imposing stark cliffs, growing like stone giants on the edge of a bottomless abyss. Evelyn stood at the foot of these stone walls, the last of her strength leaving her body. Her legs, tired and trembling, as if they refused to obey, treacherously shook. Her heart was pounding frantically, trying to break free and leave this world behind. Her breathing, heavy and intermittent, merged with the rustle of the wind through the narrow crevices. The silence was so dense that even the air seemed to freeze. She realized this was not just fatigue and weakness. This is the edge to which loneliness and oblivion lead. Her eyes, filled with pain and fear, rose to the horizon, where a fiery red sunset was slowly sinking behind the distant hills. The light was warm and cruel at the same time, a reminder of life slipping away, of time passing irrevocably. A last glance, a farewell to hope, to dreams and promises that now seem nothing more than ghosts. Inside, everything shrank with terror. The fear of dying here, alone, of forgetting herself, of dissolving into the cold earth and darkness. The wind ruffled her hair as if whispering her last words, and the ground beneath her feet seemed shaky and unreliable. Her legs were finally losing their footing. Her body, exhausted and abandoned, could no longer hold on to the edge. She fell, slowly at first, as if in a slow dance with death itself, then without resistance. There was a hum in her ears, a hum of emptiness and oblivion mixed with the faint rustle of falling leaves. The ground beneath her felt cold and heavy, like an embrace of darkness itself, ready to receive her. Her consciousness sank slowly into darkness, and the last image, the glow of the sunset spreading across the sky, dissolved into the depths of oblivion. And as the last vestiges of consciousness left her, the silent night came, the night in which a new chapter would begin, unknown and terrible. All around was deep darkness, through which only a dim twilight shone. Evelyn lay there, unable to open her eyes, and at first she felt only soft touches, barely recognizable in the stillness. Someone was gently touching her skin, bandaging the wounds that stretched fire across her body, washing away the dirt and blood. The movements were unhurried, gentle, as if they were trying not to hurt her. The faint odor of smoke and herbs wafted through the air, overlapping with the dampness of the wounds. The light breathing nearby, steady, quiet, reminded her that she was not alone in this vast darkness. The rustle of fabrics, like the rustle of leaves in the wind, accompanied every touch. Silent footsteps were barely audible in the distance, and these sounds, though simple, created a sense of protection and the presence of the living nearby. Her consciousness slowly returned, as if awakening after a long sleep. Her body was no longer torn by the savage pain, and a vague feeling settled in her heart, a mixture of fear, uncertainty, and the fragile hope that, despite everything, still lived in her. The smell of smoke from the fire was the first thing she recognized clearly. It wafted warmly through her nostrils, as if enveloping her from within, soothing her. Behind it was the subtle scent of dried herbs, tart, earthy, like the rustle of leaves under hooves, and then something alive, warm, real, the smell of leather, human, male, as if someone had just returned from the wind and the sun and the earth. Someone's hands touched her body again. Warm, strong, rough. Hands that felt strong, used to weapons and hard labor. But there was no roughness in their movement, only care, calibrated caution. He touched her as if he knew that one false move and she would disappear into pain again. The pain hadn't gone away. It still lived in his body, a slight tingle in his shoulders, a tugging burn in his side, a dull throbbing in his leg. But next to that pain was a strange sense of peace, as if the very air here knew she had survived, that she was being watched over, that she was not alone. And inside, despite the fear, something quiet was brewing, something warm, something alive. Her eyes opened slowly, as if resisting the light and the weight of waking. In the semi-darkness, she saw a silhouette, vague at first, then increasingly clear. His face, harsh and carved by time, with deep wrinkles and sharp features, but at this moment it was devoid of any cruelty. His gaze was deep, as if he were trying to see into her very soul. Not judgment, not doubt, but understanding. There was a quiet, elusive warmth in his gaze, like a promise that she might find protection here, among foreign lands. The contrast between his stern appearance and the delicacy of his gaze was striking. The warriors of this tribe, she knew, were tough and unyielding, but in this moment he seemed more than just a protector. He was more than just a warrior. It was as if time around her had slowed down. That look, quiet and confident, was the first sign of life she'd encountered since she'd woken up. There was peace in it, but also hope, a rare gift in this harsh world. Evelyn's first reaction was fear. sharp, like a cold blade piercing her heart. Her body tensed, as if preparing for a new danger, and her mind took up its usual defenses of mistrust and doubt. Every muscle screamed that the stranger nearby was a potential threat, and in these wild lands one could only survive by being alert. But in the back of his mind, through the shroud of fear, another thought began to emerge. He made no sudden movements, his gestures were calm and careful, and his gaze was penetrating and without malice. It was not the kind of behavior one would expect from an enemy. The internal conflict knotted tightly. On one side was the fear that demanded she run or resist, and on the other, a faint, barely perceptible flame of hope that this man might be the one to save her from total oblivion. As her heart beat unevenly, she tried to catch every signal, every movement around her, trying to see if she could trust. But hope was already awakening in her soul, fragile but real, like a light at the end of a dark tunnel. She opened her eyes wider and was finally able to survey the place where she found herself. It was pitch black, dimmed by the warm light from the fire, which crackled as it sent vibrant reflections across the room. It was a simple hut, the walls of hides and wooden poles woven into a tight framework that protected them from the cold and wind. The smell of wood smoke hung in the air, mixed with the scent of herbs and damp earth. Quiet voices could be heard in the distance, the soft hum of tribal conversations, like distant music that could only be guessed at. Occasionally there were footsteps, light but sure, a reminder that life does not stop, even in the darkest and most unfriendly places. Somewhere nearby, a dog grumbled, and sometimes the faint rustle of animals was heard in the silence, a reminder of the wildlife that lived nearby, hidden in the darkness. It all created a strange sense of protection and alienness at the same time, a world to which Evelyn did not belong, but which was now her temporary home. He leaned closer, his eyes still holding that quiet strength and softness at the same time. His voice was deep, calm, as if reflecting the very earth beneath his feet. He spoke her name, or rather, asked it, as if trying to bridge the two worlds. She answered with difficulty, the words knitting in her throat as if covered in rust. The thin whisper, almost unintelligible, was filled with fear, fatigue, and hidden hope. The silence became part of their conversation. It spoke more than any words about her inner struggle and vulnerability. He gingerly offered her water, cold, fresh, like a breath of life piercing the darkness. Later, maybe food as well, a simple gesture of caring, the first stone in the foundation of a new path. This moment was the beginning of her return from the shadows, a sign of gentleness in a world where cruelty was the rule. A storm was brewing deep inside her. Fear, sharp, like a thorn in her skin, would not let go for a moment. Every movement, every touch of the man provoked an inner protest. The same thought kept running through his mind. His rescue was not just an act of kindness or mercy. No, it wasn't a gift, but an anchor pulling her into the chains of someone else's will. She felt like a prisoner, a hostage to a fate she hadn't chosen. Humiliation clutched her chest like a heavy stone. The feeling that she might be considered a prey, a thing to be disposed of, was unbearable. At that moment, all previous boundaries and freedoms seemed shattered, as if the world had shrunk to a tiny cage where she was just an object without the right to her own no. And along with her inner protest grew an anxiety, deafening but constant. She struggled with herself, the circumstances, and the unknown future that this deep-eyed stranger promised. Every attempt to believe in goodness and caring bumped into sharp shards of fear. Her mind was torn, and her heart trembled in anticipation of more pain. But in spite of her fear and inner resistance, the memory of him did not let go for a moment. His gaze, with its warmth and power, drew her like a magnet, an invisible force stronger than reason. His voice sounded calm, steady, and confident. Those sounds echoed in her thoughts long after his silence. Each touch left a mark, not only on her body, but deep in her soul. It was a delicate weave of strength and tenderness that intertwined contradictorily. His hands were both firm and caring, carrying the promise of protection, but reminding her of the power he could have over her. Those touches awakened a storm of feelings in her, from anger and defiance to barely perceptible desire. Her inner conflict was tearing her apart, and in this maelstrom of emotions she was as if on the edge between fear and a secret attraction beyond logic. He slowly leaned over and held out the water to her, holding the vessel firmly but gently. His hands were warm, and when their fingers casually touched her skin, the touch was longer than expected. In that instant, an unspoken tension seemed to freeze between them, silent but palpable, as if a spark had travelled through the air. Evelyn felt a twitch in her chest, a mixture of surprise, embarrassment, and an awakening desire she tried to suppress. His fingers were firm, but not rigid. There was a strength in every movement that she could trust, but that simultaneously stirred her thoughts. That brief touch left a slight burn in her memory that could not be forgotten. The moment their gazes met, a silent fire blazed in her soul, an unresolvable conflict between fear and attraction that drew her to this man no matter what. He was caring, quiet, delicate, but with a touch of authority at the same time. His every action reminded her that he was in charge, that he was in control. This combination of power and tenderness irritated Evelyn, awakening her inner resistance. She clutched the anger in her chest like poison, preventing her from relaxing and trusting. Her mind protested against the imposed dependence, against the idea that someone could possess her like a thing. But in the depths of her heart, another feeling was awakening, strange and incomprehensible, as if a quiet, indomitable force was growing in the shadows of resistance. The desire, barely perceptible, slowly filled the emptiness inside. It conflicted with her fears and anger, stretching like a web between two poles, rejection and attraction. This inner conflict made her vulnerable, but gave her a sense of life and choice. A struggle was brewing in her soul, resistance and attraction intertwined in an unbreakable knot. It was in this struggle that a new force was born, one that promised to change everything. Night fell in a dense shadow, and the cabin was silent, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Evelyn lay there, trying to remain inconspicuous, and in the darkness her hearing was sharper than ever before. Muffled voices came through the twilight, quiet but tense. She caught speech, men's voices, among which his calm and confident one stood out. The words were about her, about the one he had saved, about how he wanted to take her as his wife. The thought flared up in her mind as a bright flame, fanned by a mixture of fear and excitement. Her body felt like it was filled with a heat she couldn't explain, simultaneously a fear of the unknown and something deeply hidden, pulling her inside this new world. Resentment burned inside. How could her fate be decided like this? But at the same time, there was a vague attraction to someone who was not just a stranger, but someone who had power over her life and destiny. In the silence of the night, filled with whispers and the faint light of the fire, Evelyn felt herself a prisoner of conflicting emotions, fear, anger, and a strange hope slowly gathering strength in her heart. Evelyn stood on the bank of the river, dipping her hands into the cold water, trying to wash away the traces of the long journey and continuous trials. Each movement was slow and careful, as if she was trying to wash away the fatigue and heaviness that had accumulated in her soul along with the water. Her clothes, soaked with dust and sweat, slid off her body, revealing skin covered with scratches and small wounds. The cold water stung, but it also brought relief, as if revitalizing every cell. She found herself struggling with the desire to forget everything that had happened and just disappear into the coolness of the river, and on the other hand, the fear that the coolness was too fragile to protect her from new storms. Fatigue weighed heavily on her shoulders, but the water gave her a sense of renewal, a small light in a dark world that she was so desperately searching for. The air around her was cool, soaked with the scent of damp earth and wild herbs, and the murmuring of the river sounded like a quiet song, gentle and yet endless. In these moments, Evelyn seemed almost transparent, as if part of this world, where water and earth washed away the past, giving a chance for a new start. He appeared on the riverbank without haste, as if he were part of the landscape itself, motionless and yet alive. His steps were light but sure, not disturbing the peace of the morning chill. His gaze on Evelyn was open and honest, devoid of any shyness or hidden agenda. He looked at her as if he saw not just a body, but a whole story, vulnerability and strength, pain and hope hidden in every movement. His eyes didn't deceive. They reflected not just physical beauty, but respect, subtle and deep, like an ancient understanding embedded in the blood and traditions of his tribe. At the same time, there was a mesmerizing, almost sacred awe in his gaze, at something alive and real, something that seemed both foreign and native to him at the same time. He stood still, letting the moment stretch out. There was a tension between them, light and subtle, like the anticipation of wind before a storm. It was a clash of two worlds, savage and noble, strong and lost, but there was no harshness in his eyes or his movements, only a quiet, respectful strength that could be a support for the one who sought it. Her mind was filling with contradictions. The man's gaze, open and penetrating, sent a wave of indignation through her. How dare he stare so shamelessly? This was her body, her choice, her personal space, and the feeling of intrusion burned in her chest. Anger nearly burst out, forcing her lips to tighten and her shoulders to hold steady, as if building an invisible wall. But along with the irritation came something else. His breathing was suddenly hitched, interrupted, his heart beating faster, as if breaking the usual rhythm. An unknown excitement flared in her chest, a strange mixture of anxiety and attraction that confused her and made her uneasy. She could feel the tension growing to an inner fire that pulsed searingly between the coldness of reason and the heat of feeling. Attempts to keep her composure and distance crashed against the tide of emotion raging inside. Her body seemed to change, a shiver ran through her skin, and despite her mind's resistance, her heart told her that this moment wasn't just an accident, but the beginning of something new. A mixture of fear, anger, and tenderness wove a complex web in her soul from which there was no easy way out. He took a step forward, shortening the distance between them, but stopped at the edge. His body was held by an invisible force. He wouldn't touch her, wouldn't cross a boundary she wasn't yet ready to accept. A silent tension hung in the air, barely perceptible but inexorably appealing. It was almost a touch, a sweep of wind between the two worlds, a hint of intimacy that dared not be realized. The moment stretched on, as if time had stopped, and a new, subtle spark was born in the heart of each of them. She felt a shiver run through her skin at that elusive gesture, awakening feelings she didn't yet want to acknowledge. The moment left behind a deep emotional response, a subtle vibration that tingled in her chest and kept her mind on herself. Unspoken but palpable desire intertwined with inner resistance, creating a complex pattern of feelings that was just beginning to unfold between them. He was like nature itself, wild and unbridled, at once majestic and noble. His every movement was powerful, confident, like the mountains and rivers that surrounded them. But behind that power was a deep respect. He did not wish to conquer or dominate, but to understand and protect. His gaze, full of passion and tenderness, spoke of the complex soul of a warrior, where power and kindness were intertwined in an unbreakable union. She was different, lost and vulnerable, like a thin leaf in the wind. She was searching for support in this new world she found herself in, and in this man whose figure seemed both formidable and alluring. A storm raged inside her. Feelings of fear, doubt, and unpredictable power intertwined, creating an inner conflict. She felt both weak and strong at the same time, broken by circumstances, but unbroken in spirit. A silent dialogue was brewing between them that required no words. Looks, gestures, and silence spoke louder than any speech. Where fear and hope, resistance and acceptance collided, a tension was born that could not be ignored. It was a struggle and an attraction, a dance of two souls trying to find common ground in a world full of mystery and danger. He retreated without violating the boundaries of her space, but he left behind an invisible trace, a warmth that continued to burn inside her and a shiver that slid across her skin. His departure echoed in the air, reminding her of that moment when a touch that could change so many things had almost happened. The silence that followed his retreat was filled with something inexplicable, a mixture of excitement and longing. Evelyn stood alone by the shore, letting her gaze slide over the spot where he had just stood. She searched the air for the invisible threads that bound them together, trying to understand what it was that had awakened in her heart. It was something new, deep and incomprehensible, a mixture of fear and attraction, growing in her soul like a fire that could not be extinguished. The rustle of the water and the gentle rustle of the wind sounded around her, which seemed to be a reflection of her inner turmoil. Each sound heightened the sense of awakening, of a new beginning, when past and present collided, leaving her on the threshold of an uncharted path. She felt that this moment was no mere coincidence, but the beginning of a change that would turn her life upside down. Evelyn's body was covered in patterns, fine lines and swirls painted in colors that played on her skin like living shadows. Her hair, loose and slightly damp, fell loosely around her shoulders, emphasizing her openness and fragility in this moment of transition. The light of the fire danced softly in her eyes, reflecting not only the flames, but also her inner struggle between fear and determination. There was silence all around, filled with barely audible whispers and the rhythmic chants of the shaman, as if nature itself was supporting this sacred ritual. Each sound wove itself into the air, creating an invisible thread linking Evelyn to the ancient traditions and the new world she must embrace. Everything was imbued with solemnity and power, making it impossible to forget that this moment was more than just a ritual. The symbolic union was formalized through a ritual that was not just a rite, but a sign of the beginning of a new stage of life. Evelyn understood that her body was obeying the tradition, moving toward destiny, but her heart was still trapped in doubt and inner resistance. It was a union made not in joy and certainty, but in a complex interweaving of duties and hidden desires. When he touched her hand gently, his gesture was both gentle and commanding, an acknowledgement that they were now connected. But in that touch lurked tension, unspoken words and feelings they couldn't yet afford to admit. A shaky line hung between them, a trust just beginning to break through doubts and fears. Night shrouded the space, plunging everything around them into dense darkness, as if dividing the world into two parts, before and after. His presence was felt in everything, in his breathing, in the light touch of the air, in the silence filled with tension. He was there, but not intrusive, as if respecting her inner world while making her heart beat faster. The atmosphere created by the ritual shifted, from a sacred ritual to something more personal, deeper, more intimate. This shift felt like being on the edge between fear and longing, between the unknown and desire. A shiver ran down her skin as a reminder that their bond now went beyond words and formalities. Each of the man's movements seemed both careful and commanding. He took his time, allowing her to maintain control, but at the same time gaining power over her through silence and anticipation. That night was the beginning of a new chapter, where their bodies spoke without words and their feelings blazed with silent fire. He removed her clothes slowly, almost ceremoniously. Each movement was filled with a mixture of tenderness and power, unhurried, as if afraid to break the fragile boundary between intimacy and respect. His fingers glided over her skin as if studying a map of uncharted land, memorizing every line, every depression, every curve. There was caution in every touch, but also confidence. He was not just an observer, but the master of the moment. It was a languor, a delay, a soft control that didn't require harshness or pressure, but instead made her want to give in, to trust. Her body trembled, responding to every touch, every movement, filled with feelings that could not be put into words. This moment was on the edge between fear and desire, between resistance and giving, between the past and what was to come. He didn't rush, didn't insist. His breath was close, The warmth of his skin felt almost like a touch, but he didn't move on as if he were giving her time, space, choice. That weight stretched on, sharpening every feeling, every spark between them. He was there, calm, sure, like a rock to lean against in a storm. And then, in the tension-filled silence, her hand reached for his, tentatively but determinedly. The gesture was not just a touch, but an acknowledgement that her body was no longer pushing away, no longer fighting. It accepts. It was reaching out. It was both an act of trust and a display of inner strength, not submission, but choice. It was as if the air between them had been diffused. Tension became heat, edges erased, and everything went into motion. Soft, dragging, filled with feelings that could not be named. She gave herself, not because she had to, but because she couldn't do otherwise. But somewhere deep inside, in her soul, shadows still lived. Complexity, the contradiction. It wasn't total surrender, more like the beginning of a journey where intimacy became a bridge between body and heart, not the end. And yet in that moment, she was with him, all of him. Evelyn woke in the semi-darkness, the silence broken only by the occasional crackling of embers behind the wall. His body was beside her, warm and strong, like a shield against the world. She could feel his breath, steady, calm, lulling, like the rustling of leaves in the morning wind. His hand was on her waist, not squeezing, just touching, as a sign that she was no longer alone. For the first time in a long time, there was no tension in her body. Every muscle seemed to dissolve into that warmth, and the fears that had recently clutched at her heart receded, leaving behind a strange lightness. It seemed that everything that had gone before, the escape, the loneliness, the cold nights, had faded into the past. Here, now, under the weight of his arm, there was a sense of peace. But the mind could not sleep with the body. It was raising a wave of questions, disturbing, poignant. Why does she feel so at peace next to someone who has become part of her new, incomprehensible life? Why was it in his arms that the feeling of home came? Tension began to build inside, not from fear, but from not understanding herself. Evelyn lay there, listening to herself, and could not escape the feeling that this peace was deceptive, dangerous. It was as if her own heart had become a stranger. She released herself from his embrace slowly, almost silently, afraid to disturb the peace she had so recently felt. Each movement was cautious, as if she were afraid of waking not only him, but also the silence that enveloped the hut like a blanket. Her steps were light, almost imperceptible, like an escape, a quiet flight from the closeness that frightened her most. She was walking toward the river, toward the cold water, where she could hide from her own thoughts and feelings, to be alone with herself. Water seemed to her the only place where she could wash away not only the dirt from her body, but also the confusion from her heart. The waking world around her was filled with morning light and sounds, but inside Evelyn everything was screaming. Pain, fear, a desire for freedom, and at the same time a longing for the safety she had just felt. She searched in this inner chaos for the slightest point of support, the tiniest island of peace, but everything seemed shaky and elusive. At the water's edge, Evelyn tore off the rest of her clothes, not out of shame, but out of a deep inner struggle. It was a silent protest, an attempt to rid herself of all that had been hanging over her during the night, to throw off the heavy armor imposed by someone else's will. The cold river was her only ally in this agonizing cleansing. She frantically washed away not only the dirt and sweat, but also the smell of his skin, the warmth of his touch, the traces of the night that had left an imprint on her soul that she did not want to be free of and was afraid to hold on to. Tears mingled with the splashing water, her breathing becoming ragged, confused, as if the air itself were filled with her inner storm. It wasn't just crying, it was a mental release, an explosion of emotion that could no longer be contained, a rebellion of the heart against pain, fear, and confusion. Endless questions and doubts raced through her mind. Who was she now, a victim of circumstance or an accomplice to her own fate? Was he the one who had taken possession of her life by force, or had she herself made a step toward him, yielding to a secret impulse? It wasn't guilt that plagued her. It was deeper than that. A fear of herself, of the fire that flared inside her, the desire that was shattering her old beliefs and shattering the fragile framework she'd tried to encase herself in. The fear of recognizing that this very desire had the power to change everything. Forever. She could feel the old supports crumbling, leaving her on the edge of an abyss where unpredictability and freedom went hand in hand. This inner conflict was agonizing, but also awakening. It was through it that a new Evelyn was born, ready to meet her true self. She stood by the shore, her body shivering with fatigue and experience, but deep down feeling strangely relieved. The water washed away the traces of the night, washing away not only the dust and dirt, but also some of the fear that had accumulated in her heart. She couldn't find the answer to her questions, but one thing was clear. Her feelings were real, alive, and that was what frightened her the most. The sound of the river and the quiet rustle of the wind seemed to emphasize her loneliness and inner struggle. At that moment, on the edge between past and future, Evelyn felt that something new was beginning. Not simple, not easy, but real. Her soul froze, ready to embrace this unknown and take the first step toward the freedom that lay beyond fear. A woman who has long considered herself close to the chief returns to the camp. Her gait is graceful and tense, like that of a wildebeest hunting at dusk. She does not hide her gaze. There is no curiosity or friendliness in it, only cold entitlement, to him, to the tribe, to the place by the fire. Evelyn feels that gaze behind her back like the stab of a knife. There are no words between them, no counter-glances, only silent rivalry. But in this silence there is a foreboding storm. The tribeswoman does not forgive and does not share. She is like the earth, which does not tolerate another's step without a trace. There is a tense silence in the camp. All eyes are on Evelyn, who is trying to understand what is happening. Her belongings begin to disappear, and there are quiet, barely audible whispers, weaving a web of lies and mistrust. A tribeswoman with a cold stare watches her every move carefully, waiting for the moment when Evelyn breaks down and admits defeat. But at the most critical moment, he appears, a leader whose power and strength leave no doubt. His gaze is penetrating, and his voice deep and menacing, like a thunderclap, as he stands between Evelyn and the accusations. He openly defends her in front of the entire tribe, making it clear she is under his protection, and no one will dare touch her without his knowledge. With this protection comes a new order. Respect for Evelyn is strengthened, and her adversary is given a silent warning. But it is not only a sense of relief that ignites in Evelyn's soul, but also a pulsing mixture of fear and desire that prepares the ground for the passion to come. Her body trembles, not from weakness, but from a growing inner strength. Fear is replaced by determination. She steps over herself and out of the shadows. Every step she takes becomes a challenge and an acknowledgement of her own power. His eyes reflect a mixture of respect and defiance. The challenge and promise of this night, being the beginning of something new and dangerous for both of them, can be heard in that gaze. There is an energy pulsing between them that is about to burst into bright fire. His passion explodes instantly, without warning. He doesn't seek tenderness. Each kiss is like a blow, sharp and demanding. The jewelry is torn from her skin in a single motion, as if erasing the symbols of ritual and leaving only the blazing truth of the moment. She doesn't resist. On the contrary, she sinks into his lips, surrendering to the urge that has been building up inside for too long. Their bodies merge in a dance of fire, greedy and fierce, like a flame that craves air and will not be extinguished. There is no room for fear in this passion, only wild impulse and unbridled desire. The night becomes a whirlwind of madness. There is no room for tenderness, only a sharp mixture of pain and passion. They merge to burn all remnants of the past, to break the chains of doubts and fears. There are no words between them, only heavy breathing and skin-to-skin contact, filled with both anger and longing for freedom. It is an act of purification and new strength where every movement is a challenge to fate and self. On this night, not just a connection is born, but a fire that cannot be extinguished. There is silence in the room, heavy and thick, as if the air itself is saturated with it. It's been days since the night their bodies burned together, but now he doesn't approach, doesn't touch. Evelyn feels empty and cold in the absence of his touch, as if an invisible wall has grown between them. A blizzard of emotions rages inside her. Longing, doubt, and confusion vie for power. Her thoughts whirl, trying to understand why he keeps his distance, what his silence hides. She suffers, but gradually realizes that this silence is also part of their complex history, an opportunity to feel themselves anew and to understand each other more deeply. She slowly crossed the space between them as if she were breaking through an invisible barrier. Her movements are a mixture of hesitation and determination, an inner urge that can't be ignored. Her heart beats fast, and her voice remains quiet, almost vulnerable. Her confession wasn't just words, but a bridge across a chasm of misunderstanding, a small step toward him that could change everything between them. His response was wordless, but there was deep meaning in his every move. The hand gripping her wrist firmly but gently conveyed the reassurance and protection he could give. When he placed her palm on his chest, the gesture became a symbol of inner intimacy, an invitation to trust and be there for her despite her fears and doubts. There was a silent vow in that silent contact. He was ready to accept her as she was and walk this path together. The slow convergence scene seems to dissolve all previous fears and tensions. Each gesture becomes a quiet dialogue of bodies, where she leads and he follows, listening to her rhythm and mood. A special tenderness emerges in this dance, not rushed or demanding, but born of respect and trust. Their breathing synchronizes, and their touch becomes light, almost prayerful. At that moment, a new bond is born between them, one that is subtle, deep, and able to withstand all trials. The white soldiers appeared on the horizon like ghosts from another world, disrupting the tribe's routine. Their heavy footsteps carried a deafening menace and a cruelty foreign to the land. They moved with a cold determination to reclaim what they considered their own, not seeing or wanting to see that others lived here. These people had their own laws, their own roots, and their own truth. Evelyn stood among those she now called her own, and her heart was torn. 2 lives, 2 worlds, 2 destinies, all mixed together, leaving her in the midst of the storm. At that moment, she realized there was no choice. Freedom demanded a price, and she was ready to pay it. The soldiers stepped forward, their demand sounding harsh, like a blow. To bring Evelyn back, not as a woman, but as a symbol. A reminder that power was still in their hands. Their voices rang out like a verdict that would not be opposed. But there was no more fear inside her. There was only the realization that she no longer belonged to them. She was not a thing, not a prisoner, not a shadow of someone else's will. Her refusal sounded silent, but in that silence, a thunderclap could be heard. It was as hard as stone and as alive as breath. It was a declaration. She was choosing her destiny, her place, and her man. The chief stood beside him. His silence spoke louder than words. He was motionless, but his every breath seemed to gather the power of the ancestors around him. There was determination in his gaze, followed by a willingness to give his life. For her, for the land, for honor. His presence was like a shield, like a promise that he wouldn't let her be taken away, wouldn't let her destroy what had grown between them. In that moment, Evelyn felt not like a lone woman, but part of something larger, ancient, indestructible. The storm broke suddenly. The battle erupted like wildfire, swift, fierce, merciless. Shouts, shots, stomping, blows. The whole earth trembled. The air was red hot with fear and fury. Evelyn found herself in the heart of this chaos. Her mind refused to accept what was happening, but her heart told her to stay close. He fought as if every blow was the breath of his history, but suddenly he fell. He collapsed like a felled tree, and blood gushed from his wound, leaving scarlet stains on her dress. Those stains weren't just blood, they were a bond, crucified on the brink of life and death. Evelyn rushed to him, dropping to her knees, feeling neither cold nor pain. The world was gone. All that remained was him, his heavy breathing, his pale face, his closed eyes. She sobbed, unashamed, unrestrained. Her tears ran down his chest, mixing with his blood. She clung to him as if he were her last resort, kissing his forehead as if she could bring him back to life with that touch. Whispered his name like a prayer. There was more than love in that whisper. There was a vow in there. To stay, to be, to fight. Because love is stronger than fear, stronger than war, stronger than death itself. He survived, but the wounds were deep. Death came too close. For days his life hung in the balance, and his breathing was intermittent and weak, like a flame wavering in the wind. The camp fell silent, holding its breath with her, a woman whose faith was stronger than pain. Evelyn hardly ever left it, sitting at the headboard, squeezing his hand in hers. Every day was a prayer, with herbs rubbed on his palm, with soft touches on his forehead, with quiet whispers. Not incantations, but words of love, as if she were calling him back. She did not let herself grow tired, as if her energy could be a substitute for his strength. Nights merged with days, when hope faded, then flared again in her gaze. And then, in the quietest dawn, he opened his eyes. A faint but alive gaze met her eyes. Everything changed in that moment. The fear receded. She smiled through her tears and realized he was back. The decision did not come immediately, but it was inevitable. The land they lived on no longer offered protection. Too much pain, too many strangers' footprints. There is an unsettling silence in the camp, as if nature itself is holding its breath, knowing that change is near. The wounded chief rises to his feet, not yet regaining his strength. Every movement is labored, but his gaze burns with the same hardness as before. He can no longer risk the lives of his people. If they stay, they will lose everything. Evelyn is near. She won't take a step away from him. Her eyes are not fear, but readiness. She's not the same person who came here lost. Inside is a strong core born of love, pain, and the power of choice. When he looks at her, he sees not only a wife, but an equal. She doesn't ask, she doesn't hesitate. She simply goes with him, to where it will be safe, to the mountains, to a new beginning. The tribe gathers quickly, without further ado. Everyone knows it's time to leave the old behind. The tears, the blood, the ruined homes, all of that is behind them. Ahead is the way. Long, hard, but necessary. And on this journey, Evelyn walks beside the chief. Not as a guest, not as a prisoner, but as one who has chosen this people, and him with all her heart. The crossing was long and grueling. The tribe moved through wild, untamed land, over hills, along rushing rivers, along narrow paths among the rocks. Horses slid over rocks, children hid under furs, women carried heavy bags of supplies, but ahead of them all was he, their leader, with Evelyn by his side. When they finally reached a secluded valley among pine forests and stone cliffs, they all felt that this was the place to stay. Here the wind sang with a different voice, and the earth was soft and alive. There were no strangers' eyes or footsteps in this place. It was as if it had been waiting for them. A new construction began, not just dwellings, but a life from scratch. Each day brought labor, but also hope. Evelyn worked as hard as anyone else. From early morning she gathered wild herbs, treated wounds, helped the women. She wove baskets, carried water, taught the children new words, and all with an easy, confident smile. People looked at her differently. They started calling her by her first name. She was no longer a stranger. In this new world, among pine needles and stones, she found not only a home, but also herself. She didn't have to prove anything here. She just lived, and that was enough. Time flowed differently, without clocks and walls, without roads and letters. Here, days began with the smell of smoke and the rustle of pine needles beneath her feet, and with her hands busy with work. She was no longer just the chief's wife. Now she was called when a child was sick, when clothes were torn, when the house lacked warmth or needed a word of encouragement. She was respected as a mother, as a healer, as one who kept the hearth. In the morning she would go out for herbs, identifying each one by smell from memory. In the afternoon she sewed warm blankets, cooked meals, told stories. In the evening she sang to the children as they fell asleep, looking into her kind, calm eyes. Everything was simple, but in this simplicity a deep meaning was born. Every movement had a purpose. Every word was warming. She no longer asked herself who she was or why she was here. Now she knew. Her past life, with its dresses and ballrooms and heavy stairs, seemed distant and dim, like a dream forgotten at dawn. Here she had no gold-just ashes, warmth, and the palm of her lover's hand. And that was enough. The fire crackled quietly, casting a warm glow on their faces. The night was windless, filled with the smell of resin, the crackling of twigs, and the distant singing of an owl. He sat by the fire as he always did, calm, deep, as if the same power that burned in the fire still burned in him. His body bore the marks of battle, scars crisscrossed his chest like a map of the path travelled. But he was alive. He had stayed. Evelyn sat beside him, not at his feet, not in the shadows next to him, on the same level. Her palm, light but sure, touched his chest, the very place where she had once first heard his heart. There was no pity or fear in her touch, only tenderness, soaked in time and pain. Then she slowly leaned in and kissed his scars, not as wounds, but as marks, reminders of the path that had made them both free. Her gaze was different. There was no longer confusion, submission, or question there. Strength lived there, the kind of strength that is born when you've walked through a storm and remained whole. She knew what she had become, not a captive, not lost. She had made the choice to be with him, to be a part of this land, this life. Not because she was forced to, because this was her home. And in this house by the fire, where the flames reflected in her eyes, she felt truly free for the first time. If you've watched this far, this story has touched your heart. Thank you for being with us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know how you felt. Until we meet again, there are more stories to come. See you again.